Today I've put together 75 shortcuts that you can use today in Excel. Whether you're working with formulas or formatting, one of these is perfect for you. Now, if there's a certain shortcut that you're looking for, feel free to jump ahead to the relevant section. But with 75 shortcuts, there's a lot of tips in here you'll be glad to learn. So let's jump in. So this is the file we're going to experiment with so you can learn all these cool shortcuts. But before we jump into it, the first shortcut I want to show you is how to create a new workbook. So if you already have Excel open, you're just going to hit Control N. And now we have a new workbook. Now let's say we don't really want a new workbook. We actually want to open one we already have saved. That will be Control O. Now you can browse and open whatever one you want, but let's just open this one. And as you can see, we have two tabs down here. So the next shortcut, if we just want to jump to another tab within the file, we just hit Control Page Down. And to go back, Control Page Up. Now, if you're working with multiple files and you want to jump to a different one, just hit Control Tab. And that's our blank one. Hit Control Tab again, and we're back to our original file. All right, let's go back. Now, let's say we made some changes. Let's change this to D. Let's change this to B. Now, if we want to save that, we just hit Control S. If we were working with a brand new workbook and hit Control S, we'd be prompted to name the file and choose its saved location. But let's say we're done, we made all our changes, so let's go ahead and close this out, and that would be our next shortcut, which is Control W. And let's do that again. So now we're back to our original file, but you know what? I think we're done for the day. Now, if you wanted to close all of Excel, you would just hit Control F4. And now we're back with a blank template. So those first 8 shortcuts are pretty quick, but it's a good way to practice your workbook operations, moving back and forth between files, tabs, and backing up your work when changes are made. So now let me show you some shortcuts to navigate around your sheet. So let's open our file back up with one of the shortcuts we already learned, Control O. We'll open our Excel shortcut file. So the most basic of shortcuts is the Alt button. Now if I hit the Alt button, and you'll see all these different labels, which will help you navigate through the ribbon as needed. Now you don't have to hold down the Alt button. So for instance, if we wanted to go to the Formula tab, that would just be Alt M, and we would just follow the labels to perform whatever action it is you're trying to perform. So let's get out of there. Now our next navigation trick, we're going to go ahead and move to the next cell. So if I just hit Tab, you see that we're moving from left to right. Now, if you wanted to move to the previous tab, pretty simple, just Shift Tab. Next up, we'll talk about highlighting cells from your current position. So let's say I select this cell here for office equipment. To select all the cells to the right, simply press Control, Shift, right arrow. Now, just as a heads up, if I were to select this empty cell instead, because it's empty, it's only going to select the one cell next to it. So Control Shift right arrow, and we get the 1. If I press Control Shift right arrow again, we get the entire selection. Same thing here. If I want all the cells to the left, it's just Control Shift left arrow. This comes in handy when there's any sort of formatting or deletion or any changes you want to make within a potential range. To select all the cells above our current range, you guessed it, Control Shift up arrow. And for all those below, Control Shift down arrow. Now, let's say we just wanted to select the entire row, not from left to right, one at a time, but just the entire row. For that, we would hit Shift Space. Next, let's say we want the entire column. The shortcut key for that would be Control Space. But why stop there? To select the entire sheet, simply press Control A. Now, say you have a large file you're working with. If you wanted to get to the last used cell in that file, the shortcut key would be Control and End key, and we're in our last cell. If we wanted to get to the first cell in our current row, we could hit the Home key. To get back to the beginning of our sheet, simply press Control Home, and you're taken to the first cell in the sheet. Now, 3 more shortcuts that would come in handy to navigate your sheet. We can open the Go To window by pressing Control G. Now we're in the Go To window. We could choose to click the special button for a specific situation, but instead, let's say we want cell E250. Click OK, and we're in E250. Now, if there's something you're trying to find within Excel, you're not sure how to use a particular formula or function, Excel has this search bar at the top. To quickly access it, you would use the shortcut key Alt-Q, and that'll provide us any help you're looking for, short of a Google search. Lastly, I like my ribbon shown, but you do have an option to toggle it off and on. Just press Ctrl F1, and we've hidden our ribbon, and Ctrl F1 again to show it. Okay, with our navigation wrapped up, let's talk about manipulating data. Now there are a ton of shortcuts we can use. Obviously, we can copy with Ctrl C, paste it with Ctrl V. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right, let's go back to the top of our data with Control Home. Let's say we want to choose a new column. So instead of manually typing our data, if this was all formatted, we could copy everything that's into the left of the cell, whether it's formatting, formulas, what have you, just by pressing Control R. Now to repeat the last action you did, no matter what it was, press Control Y. And you can see here, this just copied our formula that we had in here. It just moved our cell references over. To undo that, press Control Z, and that'll undo the last action that you performed, much like the undo button on the quick access toolbar. Let's say we want to make a little change. Instead of total quantity, we want our total average sales. So let's take our total quantity and multiply that by our average sales. Now our next shortcut comes in handy because we can actually insert the formula from the above cell. So it's slightly different from actually copying the contents. Specifically works with formulas. And to do that, we would press Control apostrophe. You see that there, and hit enter. Now, if you notice, it's actually calculating the total average sales from the above row, so it didn't move the formula down like we'd like. To edit a cell within the formula bar, just press F2. And what we can do is change our row. And to change our cell references, to lock these columns in, press F4. Now, if we select this cell, highlight all the way down to the bottom of our range, we can copy the contents or formula in the range based on the top cell selected. So if I hit Control D, you can see here that the formula carried all the way down with the correct row references. But to confirm, we could always check our formulas with the Control Brave symbol, which is just above the Tab key. So now you see all our formulas here. If there was a mistake, this would just make it a little bit easier to find. You can close that out with the same shortcut key. All right, so let's hit our Control N key to go to the bottom. And we want our totals. You could type the formula out or use the auto sum function up here. But the way to do this without ever having to touch your mouse would be the shortcut key Alt equals. And we're given our sum. Over Control Home. And since we have so many rows of data, it gets a little hard as you scroll down. You kind of forget what each column represents. So a quick trick here is to hit Control, Shift, and the letter L. And we can apply a filter to our columns. Now the filter doesn't help us keep track of the columns so much as it does filtering under the columns. But the next shortcut will allow us to freeze our top row in place, and that is the Alt-WFR. Again, you don't have to hold down Alt, so it's just Alt-WFR. And now our top row is frozen. So as we scroll down, it sticks with us. Now another handy shortcut when using drop-down lists is the Alt-down arrow. So we can see here that this category is paper products, and there's no buyer listed, but we can tell from other areas here that the paper products belong to Robert, California. So to add that in, just press Alt-down arrow, and we choose Robert, California. Now let's say our associate who was filling this out for us forgot to fill these in. We could just add them a little reminder by including a comment here. To add a comment, hit Shift F2, and let him know that Robert handles paper products. So when he comes back to this file, he'll see here there's a note. Now, if you've made a mistake or our associate's reviewing this and there's no longer a need for the note, you can delete a comment by clicking Shift F10 and then just go ahead and click Delete Note. Another important shortcut that I use all the time is inserting columns. Let's insert a column here, and the shortcut key for that is Control, Shift, and the plus symbol. And let's say we want to add an office email. And we'll list this email as joshua.r@showtime.com. shortcut.com. Let's do the next one for him. Carry.f@shortcut.com. Another great shortcut key is the Control E key, and that's our flash fill. And flash fill is what Excel uses to take the information we applied to the top to develop a pattern for the remaining cells. So by pressing Control E, Excel takes the input we've already applied and uses that to fill the remaining cells. Now, depending on the data, you may need to add a little bit more of a framework for Excel to figure out what your direction is, but most times it can pick it up pretty easily. Now, the last shortcut I want to show you for manipulating your data is to insert a hyperlink. Now, we already have a hyperlink here, but if we didn't have this contact information, we could apply their email directly to their name. So to insert a hyperlink, just hit Control K, and you're provided this hyperlink screen. Now we can set it as email address. You could do a place in this document depending on the data. You could set it as another tab or a certain row. But if we were doing email address, we would just insert their email address here and hit OK. Now time for some format maintenance. So let's take our header here. Let's italicize it with Control I. And let's bold it, Control B. We can center the contents with Alt-H-A-C. And let's give it a little color. That shortcut would be Alt-H-H. And we'll pick a color. Let's give it a border. We can apply a border with Alt-HB. However, if we decided we don't actually want the border, we liked it without it, we can remove the border with Control-Shift_. And the border's gone. Let's say we want our total quantities and total average sales to have an outline over them. So I'll hit Control-Shift down arrow to select all of them, and then Control-Shift ampersand. And now they're outlined. Now everything's kind of smushed in here. So the next shortcut, we're going to auto size our columns so everything fits nicely. To auto size, just press Alt-H-O-I. All right, that looks much better. Now let's select this entire date column. Again, that's Control Space. And if we wanted to change the date format to a day, month, year format, we would simply press Control-Shift hashtag or pound key. Now everyone has their own preferences for date formats, but I do think this looks nice. In fact, why don't we go ahead and center that with Alt-H-A-C again? Much better. Let's take our average sales, including the total. Let's change it to the currency format, and that shortcut key is Control-Shift $. Now let's take our average sales, copy that over. Let's say we want to take the percentages of that particular row and how much that contributes to the total sales. So we could do it equals total average sales divided by the total. Let's lock that cell reference in and drag that down. It's a little hard to read, so let's adjust the format and we'll convert it to a percent, and that is with Control-Shift %. Now you got a lot of ones and zeros here. So let's just adjust that. So not a huge impact for each row, but I think you see the benefit of that shortcut key. The last formatting shortcut I want to show you covers all other bases, and that is Control-1, which opens our Format Cells window. And we could change the format of the cell, its alignment, font, border, its fill, and other details. So our data is looking much more usable and legible. Now let's move to pivots and charts. First, we want to create a table out of this data. To create a table, you just have to select anywhere in the cell and hit Control-T. And it says my table has headers, okay. Now it doesn't like my filters, so we don't have a filter included here, I believe. We can remove that with the Control-Shift-L again. Now we'll press Control-T, headers, good. Now let's take our table and turn it into a pivot table. You could do that with Alt-N-V-T. Go ahead and put it on a new sheet. Let's bring in our categories and total average sales. Now there's a few shortcuts for pivot tables that work nicely. First up, we can group some of these items together. So let's say these first four categories belong under the same cost center or overseeing category. We can group those with Alt Shift right arrow. And you see that'll apply the one group, and you have all these others as separated. So let's select these other ones and say they're all part of the same group as well. Alt Shift right arrow. And all you're left with is the blanks, and you know those are ones you have to adjust eventually. However, we just got word that upper management doesn't want to see it like this. So let's select everything and ungroup them with the Alt Shift left arrow. And now we're back to normal. Well, I don't want to see these blanks here. We'll tackle them at a later date, but to hide those, it's simply Control minus. And that will take it out of the equation. You'll see that filter button right there. So I like what I see here. Now let's create a chart. If we want to create a pivot chart in the same sheet, just hit Alt F1. And that'll quickly summarize it for us, and we could adjust it later on. If you wanted it on a new sheet, it's just F11. Now I have a few more extras that I haven't gone over, and we'll tackle those right now. Let's say we wanted to hide a column. We don't want to see their hire date. So to hide that, it would just be Control 0. You can unhide that with Alt HOUL. You know what? We don't want that at all. So you could actually just press Control minus, and that deletes it completely. Now, same thing here. If we wanted to hide a row, say we want to hide this row because we don't have a buyer assigned to it, you would just press Control 9. That hides the row. And then when we're ready to add the buyer to it, to undo that would be Control Shift 9. And it's back. To insert a new row, we would use the shortcut key Control Shift plus. And we've got a new row. And to delete it, Control minus. Another way we could do this is if we didn't want this line at all, we have copy and paste. There's also cut and paste. Now I won't paste it, but to cut this line would be simply Control X. And we paste that down here, Control V. Now you've got a blank cell here. Now here's a neat one. We can enter a new line within a cell. So it's kind of like wrapping the cell. But instead, let's say average sale price. Let's hit Alt Enter. And we'll write by product ID. Enter. And you can see that expanded, showing that little bit of extra on the next line. There you go. Now, much like the pivot tables, we can actually group our normal cell data together, whether by groups or rows. And we'll group those together with Alt Shift right arrow. And here it asks us, do we want to group the rows or do we want to group the columns? So we'll group our rows. So you can see here, those first 10 product IDs are all grouped together. Now to ungroup that, we would press Alt Shift left arrow. What are we ungrouping? We're ungrouping our rows, and they're gone. Lastly, we'll say our file is done. We want to mark that we made some changes. Say last updated. And we can insert the current date with Control semicolon. And I'll hit a space. And let's add the time. We can insert the current time with Control Shift colon. Enter. 75 shortcut keys that should help you with your daily tasks. Now you might not use all these shortcuts throughout your day, but by using at least a third of these, your spreadsheeting will be quick and painless. I hope you've enjoyed these, but there are more shortcuts that I didn't tackle. So what are your favorites you use? Post them in the comments and share the trick with everybody else. I'd be happy to dive deeper on some use case scenarios to show you more of your favorite Excel shortcut. See you next time.